was 21 years old, a couple years into a printing degree at Clemson University, and I was watching the indie game documentary. At that moment, I knew I wanted to be just like Edmund Macmillan and Jonathan Blow. I wanted to make independent games for a living. Everything about college, the real world, and a desk job kinda suddenly felt like a nightmare. And I was gonna do everything I possibly could to avoid that world and make games full-time. My name is Thomas Brush, and video games have fascinated me ever since I was a kid. I want to tell you about how indie games changed everything for me. I'm sure my story is actually very similar to yours. I know we all probably experienced that rush when opening up our first console on Christmas Day. That sense of wonder as suddenly Banjo flips onto his back, carried by Kazooie. Or that sense of camaraderie and brotherhood when playing GoldenEye on a tiny TV left over from the early 90s in 4 little squares. Growing up, the video game world for me and my brothers was a place to bond together, and it never really got old. The 4 of us sprinting up our rickety wooden staircase to burst into the playroom, flip over onto the couch, blow into the cartridge, and start shooting each other. No matter what was happening in the real world, we could always rely on the fact that we'd hang out with each other after school in another dimension. I'll be honest though, I never really played video games with my brothers. I spent most of the time just watching, mesmerized by all of it. I wanted to figure it out. How did Rareware, Nintendo, and Neversoft do it? Thankfully, my brother was given a piece of software, CorelDRAW, for his birthday. This was basically the 90s version of Photoshop. It came with a clunky animation add-on called Corel Move. So while my brother sat watching movies, playing N64, and eventually Xbox, I would actually sit across the room in Windows Millennium Edition in Corel Move, trying to recreate Dragon Ball Z. Honestly, all I can remember from those days was the Twin Towers, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and making really crappy animations, showing them to my family and thinking I was the next Walt Disney. Life was good, and I felt like I could see my future. I was going to be a filmmaker and maybe even make video games. My confidence in my career path solidified in high school as I moved on from Corel Move, and I heard about this shiny new tool called Flash MX. I bought a copy from a website called cheapsoftwares.com with my dad's credit card. To his dismay, it was more like a copy of Flash MX from China. But in the end, I got it running and began to create some bizarre and sometimes cringeworthy animations. Looking back, it's no wonder it wasn't until graduation that I was able to find a girlfriend, which actually ended up being my wife. I guess she found something special in this scrawny, Newgrounds-obsessed teenager. I think I kind of got lucky because I was eventually able to prove my skill to her when I released a small game called Coma online. It received over 7 million plays with the help of websites like Newgrounds.com and made me about $20,000 with a publishing contract. As you can imagine, my head got a little big, and I felt like I had made it. I decided I'd go to college and see what they knew, and then jump right back into game development. College was where the real world started to set in. The money from Coma and a few other Flash games I made, it began to dry up pretty quick. And I began to realize making indie games for a living, it was hard. I stuck with it though and spent most of my time either studying in my dorm, watching Prison Break with my fiance, or working on my next game on my little MacBook in the basement of the library. It was kind of depressing looking back. I wish I had made more friends, maybe gone to a few parties, had that college experience. But I couldn't let go of that dream. There was always this ticking clock in my head. Time was running out to really solidify my career as a game developer. Well, that clock eventually hit midnight, and the time was up. I loved my fiance more than my career, and we got married right after graduation. She was still in school, and I knew I needed to provide for the family, so I took a job as a graphic designer at a business-to-business marketing firm, making around $38,000 a year. It was pretty good money relative to what I was used to. My wife and I had a tiny little house on a couple acres of land, and we started living in this real world. But it didn't take much time for me to start feeling anxious and depressed. After After about a week, I came home from work crying, trying to explain to my wife that feeling of being trapped in a cubicle of sorts, making email blasts for refrigeration companies. It's kind of weird looking back because I was really lucky to have a job at a really great company that treated me well. I was lucky to be making money and lucky to be married. But something in me was screaming to tell stories through video games in my own way and in my own time. That dream from childhood, that self-assurance, it came roaring back. That's when I decided I was going to wake up at 6 o'clock a.m. every morning before work and make games. I was going to work on them through my lunch break and even work on them an hour or two in the evenings. It wasn't easy, but it was easier than feeling trapped. After 3 years of mustering up creative energy in the midst of being a full-time student and then a full-time employee, I also traveled across the country to small indie game competitions, and I was even lucky enough to have Unity film a small documentary about my story. After that, I was ready to release my next game, Pinstripe, a game about a minister in hell. Well, I thought I was ready. Of course, it wasn't that easy. The game was riddled with bugs and received terrible reviews when I would submit it to festivals like IGF or Indiecade. I really was devastated, but I kept at it. It wasn't without a ton of quotes about failure printed all over my office wall that I mustered enough bravery to launch a Kickstarter campaign. I knew I needed to quit my job to be able to fully focus on making Pinstripe perfect. With the help of my sister-in-law and her camera, some footage from Unity's documentary, and my wife holding my laptop as a teleprompter, I recorded a Kickstarter video in my parents' backyard. It wasn't perfect, and I knew that. It was even a bit embarrassing asking for people's money and showing them an incomplete project and promising to try and make it better. Then the day came, launch day for the Kickstarter campaign. It was lunchtime, and I snuck down to the basement of the marketing agency I was working at, nervously waiting to click the launch button on the Kickstarter campaign. This really needed to work, mainly because I knew my family and friends were watching. I clicked the launch button, and my jaw dropped. Within the first hour, I had raised over $7,000. Throughout the day, I could not believe what I was seeing. The campaign exceeded its funding goal of $28,000 in less than 24 hours. This was it. This was the moment I had worked through high school, college, and 3 years at a desk job for. That moment when you quit your job to become a full-time game dev. It's been a wild ride ever since that day. Sometimes I thought that single moment was kind of like a glitch, that the money would dry up and I'd have to go back to my day job. But it's really only gotten better since then. And here's the thing, every full-time game dev's path is different. For some, it's one game that launches and changes everything. For others like myself, it's a lengthy process of launching Kickstarter campaigns, partnering with publishers, relying on Patreon support, and even building a loyal audience with the help of some mega YouTubers. That's perhaps another story for another time. So I'm about to turn 30. I'm sitting in my little indie game studio, and I couldn't be happier with my current career. But looking back, it really is all a blur. I always thought I would feel like I was landing a plane, like once you've landed, you've made it, you're good to go. But it doesn't work that way, and that's what I want you to know. Making indie games is exactly that. You're making them. For me, I don't ever just make a game and then I'm done. It's a journey and it's hard. It's exhausting. You might cry, and if you're married or dating, you'll probably fight. Your family might be confused. Some people might think you're crazy, but none of this is about being understood or having talent or being a genius. It's really about being diligent, humble, and hardworking. And with those traits, I believe that anyone, including you, can make games full-time.